Faster than a speeding bullet.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
More powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus. Presumed highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound.
All right, Dr. Cate, welcome to the Better Humanology podcast. I'm really glad to have you here today.
Well, thank you, Jared, so much for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun, and I know it's going to be fun because we're getting kicked off with some challenges and a book recommendation. So I'm going to throw it to you, if you don't mind, right here at the beginning, a fitness challenge for everybody listening.
I am probably the least fit of all the people that you've had interviewed because I have so many injuries. So for me, a fitness challenge is just don't be in pain when you get out of bed in the morning.
Okay. Yeah, so working on all the other things that go along with fitness, like mobility and recovery and things like that.
Yeah, sure.
Sure,
Exactly.
yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, or getting a good bed, getting a good mattress, because that can make a lot of difference once you get over 35.
And do you have a recommendation on a mattress that you like?
Actually, just a firm mattress, but get a topper for it, and you can do that for under $100, and then it's just like the same as getting one of those $1,000 mattresses.
Awesome. That's actually what my wife and I do. Through no other reason than we wanted a really firm mattress. We felt like we went overboard and got a wooden board, basically, and then we put a topper on it to soften it up just a little bit.
Wow. One step up from nailed. Huh?
Yeah, it was. All right, how about a mental toughness challenge?
Okay, well, this will take care of the book question at the same time. I challenge you to read chapter 7 of my book, Deep Nutrition, and then explain to your friends why cholesterol levels don't matter.
All right, I love it. And something maybe we could talk about today. That's really cool. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you throwing down the challenges and the book recommendation. I think that may be the first mental toughness and book recommendation combined, which was awesome. So very creative. You get creativity points there. All right. So can you give us a little bit about your background and what you're doing now?
So I'm a family medicine physician, and I have 20 zillion years of clinical practice experience, and I'm right on the cusp of transitioning into something really exciting because I've really enjoyed being a doctor, but I've always struggled with the fact that I work in a system where we're paid to see people fast, and it doesn't matter one bit whether or not we actually help their health. So I'm getting into a better position with that. I'm just going to be consulting directly with a company. They actually care if you make people healthier. So I will be working without insurance and without like time restrictions and stuff like that. So that's going to be very exciting. Also, we're wrapping up our next book. So we're just handing in the manuscript just yesterday, actually, for a book called The Fat Burn Fix. And we actually kind of, we like to think, my husband and I being the we, he's my very talented co-writer, that we've kind of recreated the science of weight loss, because it really hasn't been a science until this book's going to come out, and for reasons that we can maybe talk about. If you're interested.
Yeah, I'm very interested. I might even start there because just the title of the book, leads to the question, what is the fix, for the fat burn? And maybe you can give us an overview on that.
For sure. So the fix for your fat burn is customized for you depending on what's wrong with your fat burn. And so we break down the process of burning fat into 4 different body systems and body functions, right? And so each of those 4 functions is essential to actually being able to burn fat and maintain a normal weight. And so the thing that makes our book scientific, where I feel like hasn't been like enough point about this, is we're the reason we have fat is to convert fuel or convert stuff that we ate previously into energy this instant. And it's all about energy, actually. It's about accessing energy. And so when you look at it that way, then you can start to answer a lot of questions and make it much more scientific, right? Because the challenge that this book is trying to address is the fact that we've got some really good diet ideas out there, right? Now, so I think probably I'm guessing that you've probably long since abandoned the idea that we need to avoid saturated fat and all that kind of stuff, probably, right?
Right. Yeah.
Your listeners are well aware of that fact that was a horrible idea. And so we have some good diets now. We've got the low carb, healthy fat diet. We've got the paleo diet. We've got the keto diet. We've got intermittent fasting. But not everybody can do any given diet, right? So I'm a physician and I have the opportunity to listen to my patients when I say try a low carb diet, and they come back and they say, well, I'm doing it, but it feels hard. And then I drill down into why. And over the years, the conclusion has been actually that people had a hard time accessing their body fat for energy. And, that's something that, I don't know, Jared, am I saying your name right? I'm so sorry. Is it Jared or Jared?
Jared. Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
It's a weird spelling. I think my parents just wanted to be different. And so
Mine did the same thing to me. I have a C for Kate. So I feel your pain. But so do you follow kind of like a low carb diet yourself?
I do. I'm relatively low carb, not nowhere in the realm of keto, but definitely low carb.
And so then I'm guessing you're nowhere in the realm of keto because maybe you tried it and didn't quite work for you. Yeah,
just with the way I train, it wasn't. It didn't seem to work very well for me. I just felt like I was under recovered from my workouts over and over again.
Right. So what I'm trying to do with this book is help you not have to take those guesses, and help people, no matter where they are with their metabolic health, identify where they are first and foremost, and then go from there. And so what we've done, or what I've done, is I broke down the systems involved in converting body fat to energy in your body into 4 systems. There seems to be 4. So the first one is your body fat. That has to be in good shape. And believe it or not, we have a lot of people whose body fat is toxic, so that when they try to access it for energy, their cells kind of rebel and ask for sugar instead. And so that is a big problem. And it occurred to me that was a big problem about 5 years ago that, needed addressing. You couldn't just tell people, all right, well, don't eat, because they can't burn their body fat. And then they're starving and their cells are in crisis and they develop all these hypoglycemia symptoms and they give in and they eat and they think it's just their own weakness or lack of discipline, but it's absolutely not. So that's the first body system. Is your body fat toxic? And then if it is, we're going to fix it so that you can actually burn your body fat again. The second system is the energy production systems of your body. So I'm just calling them the energy producing system. And what that is it's actually the mitochondria in every single one of your body cells, or almost every single one. Like a few cells don't need mitochondria, like red blood cells. But every single one of your body cells, except for the few that don't have any mitochondria, are engaged in the process of converting fat to energy and generating ATP. ATP is the energy currency of the cell. And if your body fat is toxic, then your mitochondria cannot use it efficiently. They cannot dip into your body fat energy stores to produce ATP energy efficiently. And you need it to be efficient, or your cells are going to have an energy crisis. And your cells are going to say, well, this thing with burning fat isn't working. I need some other fuel. And they're going to ask for sugar. So when they do, people start to feel hypoglycemic. They start to feel, because we don't have that much sugar, right? I haven't said that, but we cannot store sugar to very much extent in our body. So we run out quickly. We run out of sugar a lot more quickly than we'll ever run out of fat. We've got maybe 400 calories of sugar that we can easily access. Some people have more, women have less than men. Men might have twice that much. But that's not a lot. If you're trying to get through a workout, you can't even do it if it's a hard workout, if you're just burning sugar. So you need to be able to burn fat. And if your mitochondria have been forced to burn unhealthy fat for a long time, they are actually sick. Your mitochondria can be sick. And they can, this sickness leads to a lot of very severe diseases. So when people have sick mitochondria, they're not in good shape. They're probably not going to be, a lot of your healthy listeners are probably going to have okay mitochondria. But I'm talking about folks who have developed diabetes or have developed any kind of like disease, really. Even cancer, we understand, is now a disease of mitochondrial dysfunction largely. Any kind of neurologic problem, memory problems, possibly like the first cusp of where somebody goes from being a healthy person with healthy mitochondria to having symptomatic signs of mitochondrial problems is with their hormones, right? So like men may feel like their testosterone levels aren't where they should be, or women can get irregular periods. Anybody, men, women, can get migraine, headaches. Those are associated with mitochondrial dysfunction. And so if you have that, then you have your second, your body's second fat burn system is disrupted, and you need to fix that. And so, we tell you how to do that too. And then the third system is the hormone regulation system. So the hormones that help you store energy and help you access your energy. So insulin and adrenaline and cortisol. And then the hormones that can be impacted by the hormone system. There's other hormone systems that are sort of secondarily damaged. And that could be, again, like the sex hormone systems. And so, when somebody goes on a low carb diet, they very often can fix a lot of what's wrong with their hormones. So that's one of the reasons that low carb diets and keto diets are so popular, because they actually do fix one of these four very serious body system problems, the hormone system. But they don't do really much of anything necessarily to fix the toxic body fat or the mitochondria. I mean, actually, some depends what kind of low carb diet you're following. Some do, some don't. And then the last body system is your appetite regulation system. And so your appetite is supposed to be regulated so that you don't have to be told what to eat, when to eat, or how much to eat. You're not supposed to have to weigh yourself once a week to determine whether or not you're losing weight at the right weight or maintain your weight. It's all supposed to be magically controlled. Well, not really magic, but controlled by extremely complex processes in the appetite centers of our brain that communicate with just about every one of our body's tissues, including our body fat, our muscles, and our bones, and so on, so that it's all automatic, the way it is with every other animal out there. You don't look at all the penguins that are like all perfect body penguin weight and look at, gee, I wonder, who's their personal trainer? How are they figuring out how much fish they're supposed to eat and all this. It's all automatic. And so when our appetite regulation systems are disrupted, as they are as a consequence of the Western diet, then we don't have this automatic ability. We have weird cravings. Our cravings drive us to eat foods that we know are unhealthy for us, like Doritos and chips and pizza. There's good pizza out there, though. I shouldn't just diss pizza. But it's a entirely newish science on how our appetite regulation systems have gotten disrupted through inflammation, and in Fat Burn Fix, we will fix that as well.
Very interesting. One thing I want to jump back to is having toxic body fat. Now, is this because fat has more of an ability to store actual toxins, and once it's burned, it can poison the mitochondria or something? Like, what is it that actually makes body fat toxic?
Great question. It is the most important question. The answer is the kind of fat the government has been telling us to eat for the past 60 years, the vegetable oils.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean when I say vegetable oils?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll just list them out though, because they're very common and it's easy to, everyone should memorize this list. So there's 3 C's and 3 S's: corn, canola, cottonseed, soy, sunflower, safflower. That's what you're going to get in most processed foods, where you're going to get most of your toxic fat calories. There's a few others that you get when you go to a restaurant. That's like rice bran oil and grapeseed oil. But the reason that these generate toxic body fat is because we eat so much. We are eating actually 1,000 times more soy oil than we did 100 years ago, because soy oil, wasn't really invented until the industrial era. And we're eating ultimately 10 times more calories from processed or from vegetable oils. And the reason these things are toxic to us is because we're eating too many of them, and they are unstable and they promote inflammation when we consume so many. So if we just dialed back on the amount, that would go a long way towards improving our health. But we'd have to dial back a lot because we eat way too much, way more than we need to. The statistics are pretty shocking, actually. If you look at where does people's fat come from, the average person gets 80% of their fat calories from these vegetable oils.
Wow.
And, we used to get 0% because these things didn't exist until about 120 or so years ago. And our body fat is now very different in composition. When you do a biopsy, you can measure the composition of fatty acids in somebody's body fat. And we've done that, actually. And there's the fatty acids now in a person's body fat are drastically different in their total composition than they were 100 years ago. So I don't want to get too technical, but there's, if you look at a nutrition label, you see these words, right? Polyunsaturated fat versus saturated fat. So those are the two of the 3 kinds of major kinds of fatty acids. The third is monounsaturated fat. So saturated fat is a kind of solid fat that's high in butter. Polyunsaturated fat is oil, and the essential fats like omega-3 and omega-6, those are both polyunsaturated fats. And then monounsaturated fat is high in like almonds and olive oil, and actually is also high in bacon fat. What's different about the body fat now versus 100 years ago is that we have about 10 times as much of the polyunsaturated fat in our body fat stores, right? Which makes sense because we've been eating a lot more. And that concentration it's just not natural. It is an unnatural concentration. And the consequence of that, there's a consequence, right? If you were to drastically change like the formula for anything, you name it, like, I don't know, like your favorite recipe for pie, right, or cake, that'd be better. If you were to like pump up the flour by 10 times, well, your cake would be very different.
Yes.
Or anything, if you have a formula for, I don't know, paint on a house and it's got like pigment and something else that has to evaporate, you change that formula, paint's going to be very different. Or building a house itself. Let's say you're making a brick house and suddenly you want to have 10 times the mortar that you used to have. Well, their house is going to be all wiggly because mortar is not as stable as brick. So just like, we've not asked what has happened now that our body composition our fat composition is 10 times more of these very unstable liquid. They are literally unstable. So unstable, we can see it with the naked eye. Butter is solid and corn oil is liquid. And that's because of the polyunsaturated fats in there. And so if we're eating all these fats that basically liquefy our body fat, what does that do? Nothing good. And so that's what makes it toxic. And so there's all kinds of things that happen. You get inflammatory cytokines. You get very large fat cells that are unhealthy that release these inflammatory cytokines. You get insulin resistance because the fat cells can't divide properly so that they can store. If you've got to, let's say you're gaining weight, you don't just get fat and happy, you get fat and insulin resistant, which leads to diabetes. Because your fat cells can't divide properly, and it kills the mitochondria in your fat cells. And then when that stuff's released, it can't burn properly because the mitochondria don't function normally when their structural makeup isn't correct, which it will be incorrect if you're delivering too much of this toxic body fat to them to burn. So that is really the beginning of the problem. Actually, we've heard so much about how sugar is bad for us, right? And, too much refined carbohydrate. And that is true. That is true. Those things are bad. But the reason that we are driven physiologically to seek out sugar is because our cells can't deal with the fat that they're getting delivered, and they need an alternative fuel. And the only thing that some cells can come up with, because they're just cells, they're not like, they don't have scientists working for them asking for like MCT oil or some other alternative fuel. They're saying, okay, well, let's just get more sugar. And they do that by translocating the glucose transporters to the surface of the cell, and you import more sugar from the bloodstream. And the very first symptom of having toxic body fat and damaged mitochondria is hypoglycemic episodes. And so, feeling like you're not getting energy because you're not. You feel weak and dizzy and tired and so on. And so, a lot of people go to their doctor with those symptoms, and their doctor says, oh, you're hypoglycemic and just eat something. And that is actually not the cure. It's getting to the root of the problem.
Now, if we're at home, it can be, if you're kind of aware of nutrition and everything, it can be pretty easy to avoid those oils, avoid processed foods, don't cook with those oils, get some alternatives. But eating out is like a different story because you can't control what the restaurant cooks your food in. What do you do in that case? Just avoid restaurants altogether, try to pick healthy ones, or is there something you do to try and combat it if you do go eat out? What do you do there?
Yeah, so I like to reward the healthy restaurateurs with with returning, right? And so I always usually actually before I go out, I will just make sure there's something on the menu that I can eat. So I'll just say, can you, cook anything there in butter or olive oil, and make sure I'm not getting canola oil. If I don't have a chance to do it beforehand, that's what I'll ask when I sit down. And almost all the time they can cook stuff in butter or olive oil. And so, that solves the problem. Now, if they have a hard time doing it and it comes out crummy, then I just don't go back. But we don't actually honestly eat out all that much. The other thing you can do is avoid the high fat foods when you're out, right? Because that's actually pretty easy to do because of the fat phobia. Most of the stuff at Chipotle's, unless you get the topping, is already, the meat is already got, the fat is removed. And, the vegetables are themselves mostly low fat, except for the avocado. So, and then you ask for, the cheese and stuff, but most restaurant, and that's good, right? The cheese and the sauerkraut, sour cream are good, but most restaurants, even fast food restaurants, they're not going to be giving you a lot of fat just because everybody's been so fat phobic. So you can always ask for just a very low fat. I'm sorry, they will be giving you a lot of fat if you're getting something that has like a cream sauce or something like that, or any kind of a sauce on it, or a dessert. Because people have been so fat phobic, it's pretty easy just to avoid the fat altogether.
Okay. Yeah. And that's just, because I would think, that's what I was trying to think about my own life. We don't eat out that often, but at home, yeah, we pretty much avoid those oils at all costs, and it's kind of relatively easy for me to do with my diet. But that's the only time when I venture out past, the four walls of my home, I'm always a little bit like, what should I do here? So I think that's good for everyone to know.
Yeah. Oops. Sorry. Definitely. It's not super easy for a beginner to this information to figure out, how to avoid the vegetable oils, even in their house, because, the thing is, you do need to get some fat, right? So you can't just avoid vegetable oils. You can't just count on adding fat to like your food necessarily, because a lot of the food has had fat removed. So we're in sort of involuntarily on a lower fat diet. Like, for example, if you just want to get yogurt, a lot of times it's really hard to find yogurt that hasn't had all the fat removed, that's fat free. If you want to get steak, you can't find steak that doesn't have most of the fat trimmed off. And so you do have to kind of consciously seek out the healthy fats when you're in the grocery store buying things other than straight up, butter and olive oil.
And I kind of wanted to, since we're on the topic of diet, this is a big thing that I wanted to discuss with you today, because I found it very interesting. And I also see a lot of people do this with injury. They do this with family history, dietary stuff. They kind of, relegate themselves to never being able to do X, or my parents had this, so I'm going to have it, or in the health world. But I know in your book, Deep Nutrition, that's one thing that you talk about is the family history as not necessarily your destiny. And that's a topic I'd love to cover, if you could kind of elaborate on that and why you believe that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. Because so it's definitely not your destiny. So one of the reasons I believe it's true is because actually the downside of that is that the people can be less healthy than their parents. And when I was in Hawaii, which is where I was when I was writing the first edition of Deep Nutrition, my first book, I was finding that folks would be a lot healthier than their own children and grandchildren, like people in their 60s and so on, who had grown up in old Hawaii, basically without really any processed food other than Spam. Because there was like no electric until the 70s, right? It wasn't like even a guarantee that you'd have electricity. So many people didn't even have fridges. So everything was like unbelievably fresh. They just hunted it or caught it or grew it or whatever. So it was like a window into the past, almost a sort of a time capsule of how healthy people used to be. And so I had patients in their 60s, early 60s, who were doing full-on physical labor jobs, like in the cane fields or housekeeping, and they were in great shape, and they just didn't have injuries. They didn't have sick days. They had so much energy. They go home and do workout videos or garden, and it was unbelievable. And then I would see, I'm a family medicine doctor, so I see the whole family. I would see their children and grandchildren. The grandchildren who unfortunately had been growing up on a very different diet, lots of processed food, and with this fear of fat and everything, way too much refined carbohydrates, and the fats that they've got often were, horrible, like margarine and stuff. And they were sick. Like today's average kids are sick. We've got so many diseases in young children, allergies and learning disorders, and even just like sports injuries that kids didn't used to have so much. That I saw it right there. I was like, there's just no way that this is kids overtraining, or that all the ADD was overdiagnosis, or children needing glasses at age 4 when no one else in their family needed glasses. It was just too much of a drastic difference. And I had been aware of the work of a previous doctor who everyone interested in fitness and health should know about, Dr. Weston Price. He's actually a dentist, and he made the same case actually back in the 30s that people could really control their own health by eating well in ways that would affect the next generation. So in ways that would affect the next generation, and of course that would change their genetic destiny in their lifetime, so that where depending on what you ate as a child, you might have crooked or straight teeth, because he was a dentist, that's what he focused on. And depending on what you ate as a child, you might have ADD or not. And depending on what you eat as an adult, if you're already diagnosed with diabetes or high triglycerides or abnormal cholesterol, you can absolutely reverse all that stuff with diet. You don't need to take medications. I don't care how many other family members also have high cholesterol or high triglycerides or diabetes. That is merely a statement about what your family is susceptible when eating this basically experimental Western diet that everyone is on. And I call it an experiment because we are running an experiment in this country on the human race as to what happens when you give people so much refined carbohydrate and so much vegetable oil. What happens? And we're seeing it. It's an experiment that's being played out. And so what happens is your genes don't work properly, right? So that's just a very fangled way of saying that it's an unhealthy diet. Like every aspect of your body is affected by your diet, your hair, your skin, your nails, all the way down to your DNA, which won't function properly either. And the science of epigenetics is the science that quantifies and codifies what's going on with your genes when they're fed well versus when they are not fed well, and they're basically forced to operate with suboptimal diet. Well, they're going to express abnormally as well.
And so, can we talk about what you view as an optimal diet? Because we've kind of hit on it here and there throughout our conversation. If people are kind of collecting some of the pieces there, not being afraid of fat, low carbohydrate probably being good, but ultimately, what are your beliefs on a good optimal diet for the human being?
Right. So those are the two knots. We don't want to have toxic fats, and we don't have too much, carbohydrates, but especially not refined carbohydrate. But what we want to get is, actually, we describe it as the human diet in our book, Deep Nutrition, because it is the diet that humans have always eaten until the past 150 or so years, when we had other people making our own food. So most people were self-sufficient. They were food self-sufficient. And to live off the land, they did 4 things. And so these are the 4 pillars of the human diet. And no matter what cuisine you're talking about, whether it's French or Japanese, or African or Eskimo, they're going to do the same 4 things. So you get your fresh food, which means food that has not been cooked or processed. So I'm talking about fresh vegetables, obviously we're all familiar with, but even dairy that's not been processed, just like fresh milk, and like sushi is an example. People used to not have to cook every bit of their animal products either, because they were growing the animals themselves and they knew they were healthy. And then there's fermented and sprouted foods, which we used to require some form of storage of the extra stuff. We didn't have canning and freezing, so we fermented our food. So that's what cheese is, and yogurt, and every culture has some kind of fermented food. And sprouted is also working with nature to enhance the nutritional value. So if you are trying to do something with seeds, for example, they're little tiny hard nuts that you want to, make bread, you allow it to germinate or sprout, and it softens up, and you don't have to have a flour mill. You don't need to start with flour. It's much healthier that way. And Michael Pollan is another food writer who talks about that. So that's 2. And then the third is meat on the bone. So you don't throw away the skin if you can help it. You don't throw away the bones. After you have, say, a rotisserie chicken, you keep them and you make a chicken stock out of it. That's all we're talking about here. And you get a nice gelatinous stock if you boil it down enough. And that gelatinous stuff has, it's not a protein, it's not a carbohydrate, it is a proteoglycan and glycoprotein, and it's a unique, different food group that is actually missing from the American food supply until recently, when we've seen the explosion of broth available on the market. And that's why, because it gives your joints and skin a unique nutritional benefit that just protein won't, and of course carbohydrate won't. And then the last thing is everyone's least favorite, which is the organ meats. So we used to eat all that stuff, and liver pate is sort of a remnant example of what's left basically of organ meats in this country. But if you go to Asia, you'll see anything on a stick. like lungs or, the entire frog, for example, or just people weren't squeamish about eating the whole thing. And when you do that, you get a lot of nutrition that you don't just that is not existing in just muscle meat. So it helps to balance out your diet. So that's like the fourth aspect of the human diet. So that's quite a lot to consider, but was our primary preoccupation. We really didn't do much else. We didn't have to keep up with Facebook or fill out our, paperwork. We didn't have to do taxes or pay bills. We really just were preoccupied with getting something to eat, and we got really good at it and got a lot of great nutrition. And then over the past 100 years, we've forgotten about most of all that skill that we had perfected for thousands of generations. And as a result, we're getting sick.
And it sounds like in your first book, you have the 4 pillars, and this is maybe a great stepping stone or direction for someone to take. Now, it sounds like in your second book, you're starting to get a little bit more personalized with an exact approach for someone. Now, what kind of, I wouldn't say that's a shift, but what led you in that direction to making things more personalized? Because that's a personal belief I have, is that it's really hard for a one-size-fits-all nutritional protocol for someone who needs to fix something. There are a lot of great philosophies and principles I think that people should adhere to, but then once you really drill down, it needs to get more individualized. So what led you in that direction with book number 2, The Fat Burn Fix?
Well, necessity. So like you said, there's, not one size fits all. And what you should eat depends on what's wrong with you, basically, right? If the Western diet has damaged your health, you can't necessarily just skip over to a healthy diet that includes things like, a normal, like a significantly reduced amount of empty calories, coming from carbohydrate. You can't just eliminate all carbohydrates if you can't burn your body fat, because you are not going to have any source of energy once you've run through the little tiny amount of sugar that your body is capable of storing. And so that's a disease state, right? You have a disease state where you can't burn your body fat. You've got to fix it. And so that what the fat burn fix is going to be about is about a protocol to fix your fat burn. and that's entirely different than, being an athlete and trying to push yourself, right? We kind of overlap those in our minds, but they need to be separated, because if you can't burn your body fat, you have that problem to fix. And there is a protocol for that it is, in a sense, identifying what you need to do, but it is kind of also like everybody needs to do this if they can't burn their body fat. But there's different steps you need to take for different lengths of time and different tools that you might need to use in order to reactivate your body's 4 fat burn systems to get them to their full capacity. Whereas in deep nutrition, what I'm talking about really ultimately there is how to make another healthy generation of humans, how to make another healthy baby. And so there's a little bit that I go into there about athletes and weight loss. But that book was really, if there was one thing, it was what is the baseline? Because we have to start with what is the baseline, and then we understand there's 2 different directions we can go from there, right? So everyone talks about personalization too, but we can't just talk about it without talking about why are we personalizing? Are we trying to personalize because we have a problem that we need to fix, or are we trying to personalize because we're trying to push our body to an extreme? And those are very different personalization needs. And again, I feel like that we haven't made enough of a science out of this, right? There's just a lot of people talking about a lot of good ideas, but they haven't codified what do you use for what. And so that was where I felt there was really a need. And so that's what I started out with. The fat burn fix is how do we fix what's broken, which seems like a good thing to do first before hopefully we'll do another book for athletes where once we've gotten everything functioning right, now you can really start pushing yourself safely without risking injury unnecessarily.
And I really like that. That's kind of how I start with athletes when I do work with them is, like you kind of book one, more. Let's make sure that you're checking off these basic principles before we talk about anything more specific. But now, you're talking about something going from macronutrients to mitochondria. Now, how do we make sure that we have healthy mitochondria? That can sound like a daunting thing to try and tackle or take on.
Yeah, right. Well, so like what I've developed is a questionnaire, and I have about probably 10 questions that help me assess or help the reader. So I've been using this questionnaire in clinic as well. But for the book, it's so that you can assess the health of your own mitochondria and just kind of gauge, what is it that, how are you doing in that aspect? But the solution is, to figure out how are you going to get your body to burn fat again, your body fat, when your body fat is toxic and your mitochondria don't want to burn it. So we've got to kind of do a little bit of walking a fine line there between starting to burn some of your body fat, not burning too much at once, and getting healthier fats into your body fat instead, and getting some kind of carbohydrate for your cells to burn until they get better at burning fat again. Because some people, they have not burned fat to any significant degree in years. And you can't just expect them to start burning fat when they don't have all the enzymes and transporters and things that are necessary. So it's a kind of a diagnosis that you have to go through, and that's what I walk people through. Right? It's not something that has a one-word answer or an easy one-sentence answer. How do you assess your mitochondrial health? That's like saying, how do you assess your hormone health? We've got thousands of hormones. What are you going to do? Where are you going to start? So I've tried to make it as simple as possible, but no simpler. And so that's what the questionnaire is going to be about. And then you assess it from there, and then you go through the protocol of fixing one thing, then the other, then the other. And a big part of assessing your mitochondrial health is, and the health of all of your fat burn systems is beginning to take tally of how do you feel when you're hungry? So I teach people what to watch for that are signs of those problems. Like, for example, I mentioned earlier some of the hypoglycemia symptoms, shaking, jitteriness, anxiety, the kind of stuff that most folks will think, well, I got to go eat, and that's all it is, and they've taken care of the problem. But no, it's a sign of a deeper problem, and that's what we've got to figure out how to help you to fix.
I really love just the direction. I think you're taking, nutrition and the science that's coming behind it and everything. It's really, really phenomenal. And I'm not gonna bring up the cholesterol topic simply because I want everyone to go actually get your book and do the homework. Chapter 7 there. When does Fat Burn Fix come out?
That'll be out next spring. So like 2019. Yeah. Uh-huh.
All right. So step 1, everyone go get Deep Nutrition. And then next on the list would be Fat Burn Fix when it does come out. I really do appreciate all the work that you're doing. And I've really enjoyed this conversation, but I want to get to the quick fire questions if you're ready.
I am ready.
All right. What's the hardest workout you've ever done?
I think it would have to be, I don't actually work out. Like I go in the woods or the desert and get lost and find my way back.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's a workout.
I don't usually do it on purpose, but somehow it ends up working out like that. So there was one time where I was in the Sonoran Desert, and I had been going in like northish for an hour and a half, and I realized my water bottles were empty, and I didn't exactly know the way back, and the map that I had no bearing on the trails that I was on, and I would have died if it weren't for some guy in a van who basically, I don't know what on earth he was doing there, but because these were like really like inaccessible trails, like it wasn't an ordinary van, it was like some sort of tricked out van that could go backcountry, whatever. He was probably looking for illegal immigrants, but Anyway, that was 3 hours or more of just intense biking in 100-degree sun with not any water. That was the hardest thing I've ever done.
That sounds pretty difficult. And now, in your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
Being in a room full of people who disagree with you.
Yeah, that's have you been in that situation more than a few times?
Oh, yes.
You care to share your favorite one?
I don't know if I have a favorite. I haven't picked favorites, but I feel like I guess I haven't perfected this exercise, because what usually happens is I feel like I'm the most frustrated person in the room. So and this is usually in medical meetings where we're trying to solve some stupid problem that's completely irrelevant to patient complaints and or to patient concerns, and do some CYA. And that's where, like, I feel like if I was a real leader, I could stand up and take over the room and explain that we've got our eye off the ball, but that never happens. So so I'm still working on that one.
Do you ever get in conversations with outside organizations or other doctors who are in complete disagreement with your views on nutrition?
Oh yeah, all the time, because nobody really takes it seriously, and yet they think they understand it all, and that's like the worst kind of know-it-all.
Oh yeah. All right. If you could only have one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Let's see. I train with my body weight, so that's a hard one. I guess I would just say a bicycle, because that's like my favorite thing.
Okay. Awesome. Now, last question of the show. What's the best advice you have for becoming a better human? This is 100% open-ended.
Let's see. For a person becoming a better human, I guess I would say consider the next generation.
Okay. In what regard should we consider the next generation?
Well, what we're doing to the planet, how are we treating it?
Okay. Gotcha. So on an environmental level.
Yeah, because that's where, the next generation is going to have to live.
Awesome. I love it. All right, Dr. Cate, I'm sure people are going to want to dive more into a lot of the things that we've discussed. We really, for everyone listening, have only, touched the surface on some of these topics. That's why I always recommend, get the curiosity, piqued, but then go check out the actual literature of our guests, read the book cover to cover. So what's the best place for people to learn more about you and your work?
drcate.com. And so that's my website. It's drcate.com.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed you being on the show. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me. It was fun talking with you, Jared.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.